just for myself.
Ayra Starr has released her third studio album, Starrgirl, and I have one major question. Is Ayra Starr still in control of her musical identity? Because after listening to this album, I honestly feel like Ayra Starr is currently standing between two different worlds. On one side, there is the Nigerian Afrobeat artist that we fell in love with. The artist who came with 19 and Dangerous, gave us a clear sound, a clear personality and made us understand exactly who Ayra Starr was. Then on the other side, there is this new global version of Ayra Starr. A version that is moving deeper into international pop and R&B, working with bigger international names and clearly aiming for a wider audience. And there is nothing wrong with that. Artists are supposed to grow. They are supposed to experiment. They are supposed to enter new markets. But after listening to Starrgirl, I started asking myself whether Ayra Starr is expanding her sound or whether she is slowly moving away from the identity that made her special in the first place. Because this album is not bad. Let me make that very clear. Starrgirl is not a bad album. There are genuinely good songs on this project. There are strong vocal performances, good production and some collaborations that work very well. But as a complete body of work, something feels different. And that difference is what I want to talk about. When Ayra Starr released 19 and Dangerous, the album immediately gave us a clear picture of the type of artist she was. She was young, confident, Nigerian and very comfortable within Afrobeats. But she was not limited to Afrobeats alone. She could move into R&B. She could make softer songs. She could make emotional music. But even when she changed styles, the music still sounded like Ayra Starr. There was always a connection between the artist and the song. Then she followed that project with The Year I Turned 21. Again, the album continued the identity that had already been established. Even the naming of the albums created a pattern. How it became part of the story of her music and growth. So when I saw the title Starrgirl, I immediately noticed that something had changed. Now, changing an album naming pattern is obviously not a crime. An artist can call their album whatever they want. But when you combine that change with the actual music on the project, you begin to understand why the title stands out. Because Starrgirl sounds like a different chapter. And the biggest question is whether this new chapter still represents the Ayra Starr that her original fans connected with. Ayra Starr is now operating on a much bigger level. She has access to more international collaborations, more producers and a bigger machine behind her. That can be a good thing. In fact, commercially, Starrgirl could become one of the biggest albums of her career. It has the potential for bigger numbers, more international exposure and more opportunities. But commercial success and musical impact are not always the same thing. You can have an album that streams incredibly well but does not have the same cultural connection as the music that originally built your fanbase. And that is where I think Starrgirl may have a problem. The album feels like it is trying to satisfy multiple audiences at the same time. There is Afrobeats. There is R&B. There is international pop. There are collaborations designed to connect Ayra Starr to audiences outside Nigeria. But sometimes, instead of all these sounds coming together naturally, the album feels like Ayra is being pulled in different directions. And that is why I see an identity crisis in this project. Let us start with one of the songs that I think works very well. Dangerous. This is one of my favorite songs on the album because it shows what happens when Ayra Starr experiments without completely losing her cultural identity. The production has a strong pop direction, but the presence of Terry Opolo changes the entire atmosphere of the song. His vocal contribution gives the record something that brings it closer to home. Without that element, the song could have easily sounded like another international pop record. But the Opolo-influenced vocals give it a different character. And for me, this is one of the moments where the album actually finds the balance that it is searching for. Ayra Starr is clearly trying something different, but she is still connected to a sound that feels familiar to where she is coming from. That is the type of experimentation I would like to hear more of from her. You can go global without making the music feel culturally disconnected. You can evolve without sounding like you are trying to become somebody else. And Dangerous proves that Ayra Starr is capable of finding that balance. Another song that really stood out for me is Heaven Baby, featuring ZAYN. Now, this is one of the songs where I feel like Ayra Starr is completely comfortable. The song is an emotional ballad and it allows her to do something that she does very well. Sing with emotion. One of the things that made Ayra Starr interesting from the beginning was that she could make an R&B record and still make you believe what she was saying. There was usually an emotional connection. On Heaven Baby, that connection returns. The collaboration with ZAYN also works because neither artist feels out of place. The song creates a space where both artists can exist naturally. Ayra brings the emotion and ZAYN fits comfortably into that world. And this is important because the problem with international collaborations is that sometimes they can feel like they were created simply because the artists are famous. You hear the song and you ask yourself why these two artists are even together. But with Heaven Baby, the collaboration makes sense. It feels like a song that needed both artists. And if the song connects strongly with the audience, I honestly believe it could become one of the records from this album that people continue to return to. Then we have Misunderstood. This is another one of the strongest songs on the project. It is clearly operating within the R&B space, even though it does not depend on the most predictable R&B production. One of the things that makes the production interesting is the use of a detuned bassline as a major melodic element. It gives the song a different texture. But what really makes Misunderstood work is Ayra's vocal delivery. This is another moment where she sounds comfortable. She sounds like she understands exactly what the song needs. And I can imagine this being one of those records that works very well for an international audience, especially in the United States and Europe. It has the kind of sound that can work in different environments. You can hear it at a summer event. You can hear it in a playlist. You can hear it performed in front of an international audience. It is simply a good record. And when I listen to songs like Dangerous, Heaven Baby and Misunderstood, I am reminded that the problem with Starrgirl is not a lack of talent. Ayra Starr is talented. The problem is the overall direction of the album. Because when you start looking through the rest of the project, especially beyond some of the major singles and collaborations, the Afrobeats presence begins to feel weaker. Take Pressure, for example. The song puts Ayra Starr's R&B style over an Afrobeats-influenced sound. It is not a bad approach, but again, it feels like the album is constantly moving between different identities. Then you have Midnight in New York. For me, this song sounds like an artist from the pop world trying to enter the Afrobeat space. And that is interesting because Ayra Starr is not supposed to be an outsider trying to discover Afrobeats. Afrobeats is one of the foundations of her career. So when an artist who naturally came from that environment begins to sound like they are visiting it instead of living inside it, you have to ask questions. Where did the original sound go? And before anybody misunderstands what I am saying, I am not asking Ayra Starr to make the same music forever. I am not saying every album has to sound like 19 and Dangerous. That would be unrealistic. Growth is important. Experimentation is important. But there is a difference between evolving your identity and slowly removing the things that created that identity. The first Ayra Starr album introduced us to an artist with a clear sound. The second album developed that artist. But Starrgirl feels like an album where Ayra is trying to figure out what the next version of herself should sound like. And maybe that is exactly what this project represents. Maybe Ayra Starr herself is in a transition. She is no longer just a Nigerian artist making music primarily for the African market. She is now an international artist. She has international collaborations. She is performing on bigger stages. Her audience is expanding. Naturally, her music is going to change. But the danger is that the international music industry has a history of taking artists from different cultures and trying to reshape them into something easier to sell to the global pop audience. And sometimes, that process can weaken the exact thing that made the artist unique. That is why Starrgirl concerns me. Because Ayra Starr does not need to become another international pop artist. There are already many of those. What made her interesting was that she brought something different into that global conversation. She came from Nigeria. She came through Afrobeats. She had her own vocal identity. She had her own cultural background. And when those elements worked together, they created an Ayra Starr that nobody else could easily replace. So the question now is whether Starrgirl is the beginning of a new and better version of Ayra Starr, or whether it is the beginning of a gradual separation between Ayra Starr and the sound that made her. Commercially, I believe this album could do very well. The push behind Ayra Starr is bigger than ever. The collaborations give her access to new audiences. The songs have been designed in a way that can travel across different markets. So if we are talking about streams, sales, reach and international visibility, Starrgirl could become one of her biggest projects. But if we are talking about impact, that is where I have my doubts. Will people look back at this album the same way they look at 19 and Dangerous? Will these songs create the same type of connection with her Nigerian and African fanbase? Will the people who grew up with Ayra Starr feel like this new version of her still represents them? That remains to be seen. For me, Starrgirl is an album with good music but an uncertain identity. Songs like Dangerous, Heaven Baby and Misunderstood show that Ayra Starr is still more than capable of making great records. But the album as a whole feels like an artist caught between the Afrobeats world that built her and the international pop and R&B world she is now trying to conquer. Maybe she will eventually find the perfect balance. Maybe her next project will bring both worlds together in a way that feels completely natural. Because I do not think Ayra Starr needs to choose between being Nigerian and being global. The best version of Ayra Starr should be both. She should be able to make music for the world without sounding disconnected from the environment that created her. And that is why Starrgirl is such an interesting album. It is not a bad project. It is not a failed experiment. But it does feel like an album where the artist is still trying to figure out who she wants to be at the next stage of her career. And maybe that is the real meaning of Starrgirl. Ayra Starr is becoming bigger. The world is paying more attention. The opportunities are becoming greater. But in the middle of all that growth, she now has to answer one very important question. How do you become a global superstar without losing the identity that made you a star in the first place? For me, Starrgirl is a good album with some genuinely strong songs. But compared to the impact, identity, and connection of her previous projects, it feels like her most disconnected body of work so far. It may become her biggest album in terms of numbers. But numbers do not always tell the complete story. Because years from now, when people talk about Ayra Starr's best and most important albums, the real question will be whether Starrgirl is remembered as the project that took her to another level or the album where she started moving too far away from herself. But that is my opinion. What do you think about Ayra Starr Starrgirl? Do you think she is simply evolving and expanding her sound? Or do you think her move toward international pop and R&B is making her lose the Afrobeat identity that made her special? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoy honest music reviews and conversations about Nigerian and African music, make sure you like this video, subscribe to Critic Box and turn on your notifications. I will see you in the next one.